Yep. And then we'll have some questions for you at the end. So yeah, let's start off with you. And your
Does the screen sharing work properly?
Yeah. Yep. We see it.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Yep. With you, your history. How did you get involved with sushi? And then into your presentation.
So I've been playing around in crypto since around 2017 professionally. Before I joined Sushi, I was working with a collective called LeapDAO. We had a Plasma main chain, and then we did a lot of B2B work. Last summer, I launched my own small project. I met Maki on the way, and I learned more about the sushi community. And what really inspired me was the drive everyone at Sushi has to kind of press forward. I like very much the idea of delivering for our community, working together, and quickly getting feedback as well. So that all led to last November when I was asked to originally just get on board for 2 weeks to help with some smart contract development around an upcoming product, and it so happened that I just stayed on, and this January I was voted on Sushi as a core developer, and I haven't taken a day off since then, and it's been a crazy ride.
Right. So obviously we see a lot of intensity in the space, and clearly Sushi is experiencing a lot of that intensity. Now, I noticed you have you guys own Sushi.com.
Yes.
So if things don't go well, there's always the opportunity you can open up a restaurant. But how did you get the domain name? Was it pricey, or what's the story there?
So the domain name was a gift from one of our investors.
Wow.
And it was a very generous gift. And
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic investor. Okay. Thank you for that. How do you pronounce your name? Is it Kino? Is it the right way?
So in German, it's pronounced Kino.
Kino. Okay.
Sometimes a bit difficult to get a hang of for English speakers. So I'm happy with whatever.
Okay, we'll try to get it the right way. So yeah, please start with your presentation, and then go as long as you like, and then we'll start to curate some questions from the audience.
So to give a high-level overview of Sushi, I want to go over some of our products, some of where we'll be heading, and then I'll happily dive into more detail into any of the topics above, depending on what your interest is. So, as the name tells, Sushiswap was based around swappings around an AMM we forked from Uniswap. So as a decentralized exchange, what we do is try to incentivize liquidity to drive an ecosystem, especially now with the collaboration with Yearn, of other projects building on top of us, as well as allowing retail investors and larger institutional investors to do smaller and larger swaps with a limited amount of price impact. And I think that's one pretty cool thing about automated market makers, that in difference to order books, especially larger swaps have less of an impact, and price movement is kind of dampened off. We've been heavily building on trying to innovate on the UI front, and try to take into user feedback as best as we can. To understand how we do the kind of incentivation for liquidity positions, we have to go to the farming bit. So we basically give away the project to those that provide liquidity to us. So if somebody provides LPs to Sushi, they can stake it into a contract system we call MasterChef, and depending on metrics of how certain pools are performing in terms of volume, in terms of total value locked, we allocate a certain amount of Sushi rewards for that. With the idea being that we strengthen our community and we strengthen the position of the protocol. And the holders of Sushi ETH LP positions, and as well as the holders of Sushi Sushi, which I will get to a bit later onwards, are able to directly change the course of the protocol through governance. So until very recently, everybody who was hired on Sushiswap was hired through governance, and anyone is able to do proposals and directly influence our future. Sushi is my next point. So what Sushi does is that a portion of trading fees, to be exact 0.05%, are directly distributed towards the holders of this token. Sushi is sushi staked into a special contract, and every day around at this moment around $150,000 to $250,000 worth of sushi are distributed to the holders of this token. And at the moment, these revenues are mainly coming from revenue on Ethereum mainnet, but as we continue to roll up multi-chain deployments, as well as continue to launch other product features, revenue streams will flow back to the holders of XSushi. That's our drive to create value and provide profits for XSushi holders, in a nutshell. Going away from our main product at the moment, swapping, we've been heavily building towards a new infrastructure layer called BentoBox. BentoBox is a vault system, which means it holds tokens and allows protocols and products to launched upon it to be more gas efficient in many ways. It allows for flash loans out of the box. Tokens that are in it can also be put towards strategies, drive additional revenue, and it improves UX flow in the sense that we can do simpler approvals. As users of BentoBox don't have to reapprove every token for every protocol, every contract they use. Like at the moment, you have to approve a token for every single liquidity pair you're using. With BentoBox, you can just say, okay, I trust Sushiswap with swaps. I want to approve all of Sushiswap. And then you can do that. And you can even do that in a gas-free manner, which is pretty cool. And the first product we will launch on top of BentoBox is called Kashi. Kashi is our own lending solution, which comes with like quite a few interesting things, and stems from the background that we felt there's a niche left in the lending space ready to be filled when it's about allowing users to create lending pairs of their own in a similar manner how anyone can create a Uniswap pair or a Sushiswap pair. Because at the moment, if you want to borrow against an asset, it has to be approved mostly through a governance vote on like one of the big lending protocols like Aave or Cream or Compound. And what we do with Kashi is we do risk isolated lending, which means you you specify a combination of a collateral and an asset and an oracle, and you can provide liquidity to such a combination, or borrow from such a combination. So there could be a lending pair with Sushi as a collateral and ETH as an asset, and you could borrow against it. But there could also be like this super risky lending pair. Somebody created of a token they want to rug pull the next day. So we have rug pull token and ETH, rug pull token as a collateral and ETH as the asset. They created, there's some interest there, and there's some borrowing happened, but the next day they do the rug pull and the collateral is worthless. So then that lending pair is insolvent, but because it's isolated from everything else, the Sushi ETH pair is not affected at all, which is a difference to how other protocols are doing it, which we think is an advantage, and which allows us to allow users to create lending pairs. And we hope that this easier step towards creation and usage for new projects is going to drive the protocol. It's also more gas efficient to use these kind of lending pair combinations, and will drive costs for lending downwards. And the way we developed it, it also allows some cool features like a one-click opening a one-click short position in a decentralized manner. We also have an elastic interest rate depending on utilization, where the idea is that we don't want huge amounts of TVL, but rather we want the assets provided being utilized. And anything that is laying unused on there anyways can still accrue revenue on the underlying bento box infrastructure through the parts mentioned before, like flash loans or strategies. And we'll start out with like a number of oracle solutions, such as time-weighted average price, but also chainlink oracles, and any user can decide what kind of mixture they trust the most, and can also rebalance between lending pairs at any moment. The last project I want to feature here is Miso, our token launchpad. The idea here is the same as before. We try to create very modularized systems, whereby Miso makes it very simple to launch a new project. And the way it's developed is that you can select recipes which users can trust. Like a recipe would be, for example, create an auction, Dutch auction to set the initial price, and then automatically the proceeds of the auctions would be put towards a liquidity pair, and then those liquidity pair tokens would be locked for maybe a year. And a user knows that if a project is launched with a certain recipe, that exactly this will happen. And even if somebody has bad intentions, a nice quick overview over what we're doing at Sushi at the moment. And I'm super happy to go into more detail into any of the aspects, if, and probably did, any questions arose from this.
Sure. Your elastic interest rate model, can you talk a little bit more about that? What does that look like? How is it elastic? Is there, are there algos there? Can you talk just a little bit, just shed a little bit more light on that?
Sure. So the idea of elastic interest is that we look at utilization, and we have a target utilization window. And if the utilization is in the target utilization window, the interest rate stays the same. If the utilization strays out of the target window, upwards, the interest rates increases, and downwards, the interest rate decreases. And it decreases for as long as it's outside the target window, until it drops a certain inner and out, like upper and lower bounds of a minimum and maximum interest rate. And if it goes back into the target, it stays at the interest rate it was last set to. And that system should enable to find the best market rates for interest on a certain pair.
I see. Okay, and with MISO, how do we see what's in the? Is there a MISO market? Is there a way to look at what others are doing, what templates others have used? Is there a way for me to look at where the crowdfunding is occurring? How can I see what others are doing? And where can I see a catalog of the templates that you're mentioning if I want?
Exactly. So there will be a number of templates defined by us, which we'll document and also feature in the UI. And if those templates are used, it's pretty easy for users to find that. And the UI will feature up-and-coming projects and have some nice displays for the auctions and so on. And but anyone else could also bring with them a template as a contract. And,
I see. But it's not ready yet. Is that? Excuse me.
MISO is not launched.
It's not launched.
Kashi is also not launched yet.
Okay.
Kashi is the next project to go out, and afterwards MISO will go out.
Got it. Okay. And what's the rough timeline for those?
It's always dangerous to give exact timelines.
Right.
But formal verification on Kashi is now almost done. So it's going to be done next week, and I would assume our launch window to be after that time, as I expect it to be going online in the week or the week after.
Okay, so it's very, pretty soon.
With MISO, we have a longer time frame. So the contracts are ready, the UI is pretty ready, but then we go into like a further security testing phase. So what we do is we do extensive unit testing, we do extensive external code reviews, and then we go into formal verification of core contracts.
Okay. So some of our audience, a lot of our audience, they're very new to DeFi, right? So kind of DeFi is still in its early stages. And even for a lot of blockchain people, DeFi is a new space, right? New terms, relatively complex, right? So everybody understands pretty much how blockchain works. But the blockchain layman doesn't understand how DeFi really works. A lot of these new approaches. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. And one of the questions I keep getting is the order book versus AMM model. From your perspective, because you're in the trenches, so to speak, in the sense of building this protocol, and therefore you need to understand these models really, really well and how these algorithms work. You mentioned price movement as one benefit of AMM, right? So you have a large trade that should not move the market. But what do we lose with AMM that we had with order books? Or can you give me a pros and cons assessment of the order books versus AMM? And then also, is the approach that Sushi is taking, it's a fork of Uniswap. Are there any modifications to its AMM model at a very high level? Are there changes in how AMM is done under Sushi? So I'd say, let me just say, give us an overview of the pros and cons as far as you can see them of order book, market makers putting out bids and asks versus the AMM, where it's kind of detached, right? There's a detachment between the liquidity provider and the liquidity person that's using the liquidity.
So I think to start off with your last question, at the moment, the Sushiswap pair the pair contracts are direct fork of Uniswap without any kind of modification. Like the kind of modifications we did are in terms of actually distributing a portion of the fees to holders of like this revenue-bearing token, which has a bit of complexity. Like larger divergence will happen with V2 release of our system and additional tooling on top of it. So what's difficult in an AMM setup is some ideas you're very used to in an order book way. Like it's a lot harder to do limit orders and, for example, stop loss limit orders, because you don't have a very reliable price feed directly. Like you have to do some kind of Oracle system so that you can do that, but you also have to do it, and that gets tricky. And all of these options have some kind of off-chain element to it, just because it would be too expensive to actually store these orders on chain at the current costs. So for those traders who are used to these kind of options, they're at a disadvantage at the moment with DeFi. What I was alluding to earlier in terms of price impact is that with order books, like once there's sufficient price movement, orders can always be cancelled, and with a lot of pairs, you don't have like once some barriers are broken, you don't have a lot of orders backing that up, or once price moves up, like you have orders cancelled. But because of how much liquidity is locked up in some kind of farmings, you don't see the same effect of people pulling out liquidity as quickly, or with the equivalent being orders on chain. Because of the way the formulas work, you also don't have as quick price movement, and you can also, and you know exactly in front, you can calculate exactly what your price impact is going to do when you try to make a trade. Like if you want to know what will it cost me to buy $1 million worth of sushi, you can do that in one transaction through Sushiswap, and you know what the end result will be. There can be like a tiny bit of slippage, but you have that result beforehand, and it won't directly impact the price too much. Whereas if you're trying to buy up large amounts on an order book, orders might be pulled on the selling side.
Right. And what about the market efficiency with AMM and order books? Is there a difference in efficiency and therefore ultimately fees and the cost for transaction, even the economic cost of transactions?
I think that
right now, I mean, generally speaking, to do a trade, relatively speaking, is more expensive than, let's say, I did an equities trade, right, which cost me, pennies. Outside of gas, transaction fees, what it costs me to trade is significant, right? 0.3%. It varies in different protocols.
Yeah.
That's indicative of, to some degree, inefficient market, or a market that's still looking to settle down to some degree. Maybe it needs more volume. What are the factors that are driving this relatively higher transaction fee? When do you feel like it's going to come down? If it's going to come down, where is it going to end up? Let's say in 3 years from now. What does that normal state look like, assuming that we are not in a fully normal, we're in a kind of early kind of cowboy stages of DeFi. So, you know, we have high APYs, we've got high rates.
I mean, I feel like there are multiple answers to that question. On one end, I mean, the actual swap fees are at the moment hard coded. That's a value, but you also have to see it's a value enough people are to accept,
right,
and see a value in. I think it is interesting to think about how you can make that value of swap fees more dynamic, or give more controls to the actual pools of setting those swap fees. Because in the end, it should, I mean, the part of like democratizing this model is that like the decision power should go towards those that actually provide the liquidity on how much fees they want to take, and how much fees they're happy with. And in the end, they have to they have to think about like what makes sense to them, and where they see the most beneficial point. And then we have the transaction fees on Ethereum in terms of gas prices, which is especially troublesome for those tradings in smaller amounts. I mean, it doesn't matter if you put $100,000 in a trade if you pay $30 in transaction fees, as much as it does if you try to trade $200. And for those smaller traders, I think what is interesting for them is roll-up technologies. We are especially excited about ZK roll-ups, and doing trades on the roll-up should bring significant improvements in terms of transaction fees. Like last year I looked at it, I came to the conclusion of like around 100x. Might even be better if usage is high enough on the ZK rollup.
Got it. Now, when you come up with a new model, or you're adjusting or using, whether it's a forked model, or you're tweaking, you're basically playing the role of an economist, right? I mean, you're basically managing a mini economy. You're defining, using Solidity or whatever it is, the parameters of this economy, right? How do you test the economic model? I mean, it's one thing to test the source code for attack vectors and things like that, but how do you test an economic model, especially when you're doing something that doesn't really exist anywhere else? For edge cases, are you doing Monte Carlos? How are you harnessing that? Can you talk a little bit about, and I know this might not be what you specifically are working on, but in general, your understanding of what's occurring in the space or within Sushi as an organization, how are economic models arrived at? How are they tested for feasibility, for edge cases, for where the extreme black swan situation, you want to learn about that first and not experience it and then learn about it. How is that evaluated right now?
I mean, I feel like one part is like looking at what kind of situations would be potential vulnerability to the project, and finding about these edge cases is easier than testing for optimal parameters, if that makes sense. Like to answer your questions exactly, like what we try to find, to actually find edge cases, is to do a lot of, we do state-bound testing, and then to find the edges of our contracts, we do formal verification on them, and we also try to do economic simulations based on historical data, and just try to see how our contracts would behave in historical scenarios. But to be frank, that the tooling at the moment is not perfect, and that is something we want to continue to improve on and invest money into. Like what we've done for like the past half years, spent a lot of money on trying to improve up on security processes around operational security, but also smart contract security. Economic modeling is something we'll probably invest more now. We hired a strategist, and we're probably looking to expand our team more in that direction as well.
So when you do simulations, so this is very interesting for me. So I see a lot of projects don't do this, right? So they don't do the simulation. They're just looking at code attack vectors, and they're like, okay, great, we're good to go. How do you do simulate? Like, what approaches do you take? I mean, is it Monte Carlo? Monte Carlo may use historic data, but then it tries to go beyond the historic data, right? With distributions.
We don't do Monte Carlo. We just at the moment we just do historic simulations.
Okay.
It's like looking at like the worst possible crashes.
Right, but you with historic data, you're tied to specific variables, and you're tracking specific variables and the variations in those variables, right? Yeah. With Monte Carlos, you potentially, if you're modeling it the right way, you're adding other potentially external variables, and you're allowing a lot of those variables to freak out, and multiple variables to freak out or come in within range, and trying the different combinations of that. What's your thoughts on the future of being able to model this? Because in a lot of ways, testing those models will allow you and our team to say, well, we are comfortable with this economic model, but it will also allow us to be more creative and innovative.
Definitely, yeah.
Right, because that's the future of DeFi. People define DeFi as redoing traditional finance. I don't believe that's really the case. I think the case is that we are going to do brand new kinds of things that didn't exist. And in order for us to be very successful with that, we need to test economic models. And so we need to test harnesses and all that kind of stuff. So can you shed your thoughts on that, where that's going, where the future is? Maybe some ideas around what you think are best practices.
I think it's rapidly evolving, and it definitely helps that there is more money in this space, because it makes it a lot easier to hire people if you can offer them more than what they're earning at their current job, and you kind of have the possibilities to just hire the best people, and then it will take some time to get a result, but I think we'll pretty quickly see all of that tooling improve rapidly. Like only like looking at like the way Solidity tooling has been going over the last few years, it had made rapid successes, and I see economic modeling in DeFi like tracking behind that by quite a bit. But I'm confident we'll get to a similar point. And I agree with your assessment on the importance of it.
Right. Okay. Let me see if we have any questions. I don't think we have any questions from the audience at this point. Everybody's still a little sleepy, including myself.
Yeah.
I just got out of bed. But let me see here. Okay. No, there aren't any more questions. Okay, I have. That'd be great, because I have tons of questions, and I don't mind hogging up the time. But what is the future of? So I mentioned something about DeFi. What is the future of DeFi in your mind? Like, where is this all headed? In Europe, and I actually will be having a conference. Myself, I run a central bank digital currency think tank. I'll have the governor of the Swiss bank coming and talking about. There's a platform called New Taler, which is a open source eCash system. But DeFi is kind of going to be a thorn in the side of lots of people, and I don't see that as a bad thing. I see that as a good thing. Where do you see DeFi headed 5 years from now? Like you're kind of in the driver's seat. Where do you see it headed? Where do you see the challenges are? Where's the resistance points, and how do we overcome them?
I mean, I think it's always difficult to give exact time points, but I'm pretty confident that DeFi will replace, radicalize what exists in traditional finance right now. Because I do believe we can build better products for users, for investors. I think one thing I want to see is companies actually delisting from a stock exchange to create a token and give out a security as an ERC20 in a regulated manner. And I think base a lot of existing financial products, create new ones, and give accessibility to financial products to those that didn't have it before. Once we can overcome like these first hurdles you mentioned before in terms of transaction fees, because for retail investors the 0.3% isn't the issue, but the $20 fee is. So once the $20 fee is out of the way, the 0.3% is not going to stop my friend who has a few €100 he would like to put into something.
Mm-hmm. And so what does DeFi look like? And we have tons and tons of different options. There'll be many other types of protocols like Sushi, but doing all kinds of interesting things. Is that where we're headed?
I mean, I hope that's where we're heading. I think it's not as much like a black and white street. Like I guess we'll see some financial institutions trying to innovate themselves. Some are going to be left on the side tracks, and some companies in the DeFi ecosystem not going to make it, and some succeed as champions going out of this field. And I do appreciate and hope that we can keep the open source spirit that has brought on so much of DeFi so far into the future.
Right. I mean, we did see some protocols that came on actually yesterday. DYDX was actually somewhat centralized. They had some centralized stuff. I don't know if those centralized components were open source or not. But we're seeing some places where there is some hybrid. They fork and then they add centralized pieces that are maybe not open source. But in terms of the DeFi world, if there was a message, and maybe we can wrap up on this question, if there's a message or a pet peeve that you had about where the DeFi community is right now, how the community is around something that you could tell them that maybe frustrates you about the community, or something that you wish the community took better care of or put more attention to, what would that be? Like, what would you think is something that the community needs to focus on that maybe it's not focusing on or addressing enough of? And for me, if somebody asked me that question, it would be education. Would be my answer. That there is, and the one reason we're doing these conferences is to it's not for the expert DeFi trader. We're not really interested in that person at this stage for this conference. We're interested in the person that's like, what's a swap? How do you swap it? What does that even mean? What's a liquidity pool? But what would be the one thing that you would want the community to understand and think about, and that's coming from maybe a place of pain or frustration or wisdom, or something where you feel like you want to get this message out, seeing what you see, sitting where you are?
I think education is one very good point, and that I mean, I also see it from the other side. Like, it's if you're building, it's sometimes, especially in like this fast-paced environment, it sometimes feels like you don't even have the time to get out great documentation as well. On the other hand, I feel like we should always like try to push the envelope of what's possible, like trying to not rely too much on, and when it's about Solidity development, on external libraries, but focusing on what can change, and even in code, which is very often used, trying to find the little nitpicks of how it can be a tiny bit efficient, because with like heavily used codes, like every small thing we can shave off is going to make a difference for the average user.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for your time. We're over our allocated time. Kino, thank you so much for your thoughts. You've kind of humanized sushi for us, for a lot of people. The work that you guys are doing obviously is fantastic work. The work that you're doing is very inspiring. You know, I'm a big fan of the protocol and the team, and so really appreciate your time. I wish we had more questions. People are sleeping.
Yeah.
And they will be angry at me later in the day for not having you later, on it later in the day. But we accommodate people schedule.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that.
No, not a problem at all. And so, but we do expect a lot more. We would have had a lot more interaction had this been a little bit later in the day. But I appreciate your time. I would love to get the slide deck. Oh, I think you sent me the link for the slide deck. We're going to be distributing the slide deck to everybody. So those of you that are on here, we're going to resume at 9 a.m. Eastern. We're going to have Yearn Finance, Algorand, Balancer, MetaMask, Sif Chain, Zap, a bunch of other protocols, Bloomy. We'll even have 1inch coming in and doing a talk starting at 9 a.m. through into 5 p.m. Eastern time. So I look forward to seeing you at that time. I'm going to go back to sleep. Actually, I probably will not. I'll probably end up getting a coffee and just keep working. Kino, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I look forward to bringing you on something else that we do down the road, and hopefully we can get you a lot more questions. I got a lot of messages from people like, "Where is sushi?" And here is sushi, but people are sleeping. But that's life. Great. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.